President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
More problems domestically with their economy.
Let's talk geopolitics for a second.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Chaos Incorporated. Welcome back to my channel. Today's episode is called When Dragons and Tigers Fight, Long Cheng Hu Do in Chinese. Old Chinese idiom about two powerful beasts wrapped in combat, and it just continues endlessly. That's what we're seeing in the world today. The chaos continues endlessly. Today we're going to cover multiple regions of the world, some geopolitics. We're going to cover updates on the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to cover updates on the global drought we're seeing everywhere. Rhine River at the lowest levels in 100 years. We're going to cover that and the kind of economic chaos that's going to cause in Europe. We're going to look at emerging market currencies and how they're getting smashed against the U.S. dollar, while the U.S. dollar gets smashed against real goods and services. Fiat currencies continue to implode. We're going to cover United States market. Half companies now predicting layoffs. They're preparing layoffs for their companies. A lot of economic issues there. And then we're going to cover the title of the episode, which is When Dragons and Tigers Fight. We're talking about the behind-the-scenes battles for the global titans in China that kind of cause a lot of this economic news you see, but nobody really knows what's going on. There are literally families worth hundreds of billions of dollars that you've never heard of fighting behind the scenes in China, and that's causing a lot of economic chaos behind the scenes. So let's get started here at Chaos Inc. It is the 20th of August. This is episode 8, When Dragons and Tigers Fight. Russia-Ukraine war. We are now, this coming week, going to be at the 6-month interval of the war. Russia continues to hold roughly 25% of the Ukraine. We do seem to have moved into generally a frozen conflict, and this conflict may freeze more as we get towards the winter. The Russians continue to take small cities in the Donbass. The Ukrainians have talked about a counter-offensive in Kherson, which is never happened. That's in the south. The Russians continue to try to build up Mariupol. What's most concerning is the nuclear power plant that the Russians and Ukrainians are currently fighting over. Russians have occupied it. The Ukrainians are shelling it. The United Nations is trying to get a team in there. Putin has called Macron and warned of an absolute global catastrophe. If the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying the Ukrainians are planning to launch a terrorist operation in the nuclear power plant with the goal of getting foreign troops into the Ukraine. So we're basically at a suicidal Mexican standoff here over the nuclear power plant. The counteroffensive in Kherson has never happened. As I mentioned, Russians are taking small areas in the Donbass. Winter will come in. The fighting should slow down. It's going to be very difficult for Ukraine. They have yet to prove that they can take anything back. No air power, no heavy armor. They have some artillery now, which they're able to fight back. We saw terrorist operations in Crimea, which destroyed some Russian ammo depots. It is the first signs of Ukraine going on the offensive. We'll see if that tipping point ever happens. My impression is if it ever does, what you're going to have happen is you're going to just have Russia mobilized, right? They've only got 200,000 troops in there. Half the fighting's been done by the people of the Lugansk and Donetsk republics. If we see Russia mobilize, they could put 500,000 more men into the theater, and we could continue to see this conflict go on and on. There's another train of thought, though, that the Ukrainians are kind of at the last of days here. Once you take the last few cities here in the Donbass, there's nothing but cow pasture all up to the Dnieper River. So if Russia gets through here in the Donbass by the end of August, early September, which was what the time frame was supposed to be, we could see winter settle in with the Russians controlling the southeast, east of the Dnieper, and then put their sights on Odessa and Kharkov in the northeast. We'll see. Leaked documents came out this week that the Ukrainians have lost 191,000 people, soldiers. That's casualties. That means dead and wounded. The dead is anywhere from 60 to 70,000. The rest are wounded. This is just a nightmare. They've called up people as old as 70 years old now. How many more are they going to lose? It could be another 200,000. Could we see 1 million casualties in Europe? It's not beyond a possibility. So now we have nuclear Chernobyl-like incidents that are potentials to happen. All that wind could blow right over Poland, Germany. The world insanity has got to stop. The Americans have to stop trying to bleed Russia as much as possible. There's no end game here that makes sense for anybody. So really the adults have to take over, and you have to. The West is basically in a leadership vacuum right now. So it's just bloodthirsty national security state that's just running around breaking everything. So that's where we are in the Eurasian steppe lands. Farther over to the west really is the Ukrainians are paying the biggest price of anybody for this. But Europe has also got a long winter coming. We've talked about this before. German electrical prices are already hitting records. German politicians had come out and said this winter the social peace will be tested. You can't buy a wood stove in Germany. They're sold out. Nord Stream 1, the pipeline, was also cut 3 days this week. The tanks are about 60% full for the winter. They need them to be about 80% by now. Putin is no doubt gaming the oil and gas shipments, and particularly the gas. 2% of their GDP, it's a small number. They can cut it off. They're going to cut Europe down to the very basic bare bones. The industries are going to be shut down. They'll be able to heat homes most likely, although they're currently trying to get people to cut back, telling people don't take a shower, take a sponge bath, save energy. The chemical plants are at restricted capacities. Top all this off is a perfect storm of a very strange kind of global drought. The Rhine River, which is the main commercial artery of Europe, runs from the north in Holland down all the way down through Serbia. Transports a lot of this stuff comes through. A lot of this stuff we need in commercial material goods comes by canals and rivers, sea barges. That's oil, coal. These things, these general commodities. The Rhine River's too low now to move ships to navigate in certain parts. You're seeing hunger stones appear. Hunger stones were put in by medieval people to highlight when the river got too low. It would signify famine. That hasn't happened in 100 years. You're seeing German warships show up in Serbian port towns that were sunk in World War II so far below the river that was not a big deal. They're just down there. Now they're up on the surface. So we see this also in U.S. with Lake Mead. You see the Southwest drying out. You see China has said they have the worst drought in 60 years. The farmers can't keep the crops alive. We're seeing the tinder go dry, as the Chinese media is calling it. The Yangtze River Basin, which is one of the most fertile agricultural areas of China. Top all this off with a 40% reduction in global exports of fertilizer. This is not a pretty picture. So we're going to have, there's no doubt at this point we're going to have food issues. So there's going to be calorie issues for a lot of the world's poorest. A lot of the LNG, which we talked about, has been redirected to Europe. It's not going to places like Pakistan, like Sri Lanka, like different areas. They're going to be energy hungry. They're going to be calorie hungry. This is going to be global domino has already been put in effect. So we really need to watch these spaces carefully. I did mention natural gas. That's about 40% of natural gas use in Germany. is by the large industrials. I've said it before, I say it again. Germany Inc. runs off Russian cheap natural gas. The European economy is Russian cheap gas plus Germany Inc. exports equals the European economy. That's dead. And you have to really wonder who's running European foreign policy. You know, if the question must be asked now at this point: is Europe a sovereign entity? I would say it's mainly not. They still are occupied by American troops. When it comes to global negotiations, you see President Biden instantly say we'll shut down Nord Stream 2. Doesn't mention Hunter Biden works for the Soviet gas network oligarchs, which would benefit from that. But so he just casually says we'll shut down Nord Stream 2. This is an agreement between two sovereign states, Germany and Russia. How does America just blatantly just say we control all this? You have to really wonder behind the scenes who's running Europe. And it really looks like it's been exposed that the United States of America is running Europe at this point. And they're going to crush Europe into and consolidate into an American economic empire. We're going to export our LNG. We may end up exporting coal. Germany Inc.'s no longer going to function. We're going to, maybe take over a lot of the industrial space of Europe. So we'll see how that unfolds. We'll keep watching this, but it's very, very interesting. And it looks like really down times for Europe. The euro's at 1-to-1 now, the biggest shorts in history of the euro. Watch that to just keep cratering. You could have a run like on the pound when the British Empire faded from real power. Globally, they had a run on the currency. We could see that in Europe. We could see the euro go down 20%, 30% again. So from where it already is, drop, which is around 30%. So watch that space. Talking about currencies, before we get into some of the other areas of the world, the United States and China, talking about currencies, we're seeing an interesting thing develop, which we really need to keep an eye on, which is global emerging market currencies getting smashed by the U.S. dollar, while the U.S. dollar in turn gets smashed against real goods and services and through inflation. So the U.S. is actually holding up pretty well because they have the dollar. But countries like Turkey hit 18-to-1 this week. That's a 79% reduction in the currency since 2018, and they're well over 100% inflation. Argentina down 72% since 2019. Japanese yen's down 25% this year, and that's not an emerging market currency. That is a currency that covers the global carry trade. That's a funding currency. These kind of numbers are shocking. Pakistan down 35% on the brink of a civil war. Turkey, I have friends there that are telling me civil war is not far behind. And Brazil's down 37%. So there's currencies that have already been smashed, and there's currencies that have been pegged, and the governments are spending billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, to maintain their stability in their currencies, which won't hold. It never holds. It's like putting your finger in a dike. So what are we going to see? Every currency is going to get smashed against the dollar, 80%. Then you're going to have emerging debt rollover, done. Then you're going to have global banks, particularly U.S. and European banks, in big trouble. You're going to have them have to deal with the emerging market debt crisis on top of a housing market crisis, which is already turning over. You've seen numbers this week. So that's an interesting space to watch. Watch currency meltdowns globally. Stage 1 is smashed against the dollar. Stage 2 will be the dollar gets smashed against everything, against all real goods and services. This gets us into the United States, where we are in the United States today. Half of companies are planning layoffs. A lot of people are asking, where'd the labor force go? It's just a bizarre economy. You've got half the companies planning labor layoffs. That's in the white-collar space. In the retail and the blue-collar space, can't find workers. Companies still doing reduced hours because they don't have people. I think what's happened here is that during COVID, a lot of the immigrants left, and a lot of them didn't come back. I think that's the only thing that could explain a gap that we're missing of millions of workers. Most of them are on the lower end, right? It's not the white-collar end so much. It's just the lower ends. So I think that may be one explanation, but this is one area of the world economy in America, and particularly economists in America, which are goddamn clueless, they're still scratching their heads trying to figure out what's happened. Over here in the U.S., as we're holding up much better than Europe, probably even better than China at this point, better than emerging markets, but we are showing signs of stress fractures. So this week, U.S. industrial is starting to buckle. 20% company that does 20% of our aluminum production is shutting down due to high electricity prices. So 20% of your aluminum production, aluminum, glass, steel, ceramics, these kind of things are absolutely energy intensive. You know, I ran a steel plant myself. 20% or 30% of our costs was just electricity. I used to get electricity bills for $500,000 a month. That's the kind of energy these things draw with their electric arc furnaces to smelt things. And if you don't have a very low energy cost profile, you're done. And that's why Germany, now paying 800% more for natural gas than the U.S., Germany Inc. is done. Okay, that's the base of everything in your economy. If you don't have the cheap energy, you don't have the cheap aluminum and steel and glass, then you don't have the cheap Volkswagens. Okay, it just cascades through the whole economy. As I mentioned, U.S. is holding up better, but we're definitely showing signs of stress fractures. You've seen Walmart in this last month. Walmart, Target, everybody's warned inventory. I have good not inside information, but from suppliers of Walmart. They have inventory through the roof, not only at the stores and the hub locations, but also at their suppliers. What happened? COVID came, COVID supply chain shortages. Everybody over-ordered. Goods showed up late for the summer season. They showed up for spring. They showed up in summer. They can't sell as many, like, for instance, barbecue grills. They show up late in summer. They're not there for spring. They can't sell them. Bang, 85% off. Then they go back to the suppliers and say, give me money. You owe me money because you were late. You have a cascading failure potential in U.S. retail at this point with over-ordering and going back to suppliers for money and not being able to sell goods and trying to catch up and normalize during a post-COVID economy. These are some of the issues going on in the United States. Now, last topic. Let me cover, before I get into our last topic on China, let me cover a few other areas that are going on. Mexico, you saw cartel wars against the government spring up the last several weeks. Over 130 convenience stores are burned down on the border. The cartels, the new Jalisco cartel, is causing havoc because one of their leaders was arrested. Mexico's become kind of it's really a dichotomy. It's a strange situation. It's a kind of very powerful, growing economy at its base, but it's shadowed by the cartels and it's almost impossible to tell where the cartel starts and where the government ends. And this is the cartels have gotten way too much power, and can they be reined in is the question. They've got roots now through the United States, and some people are predicting in 10 years they'll run the Southwest United States, so it will no longer be controllable. So you've got that going on south of the U.S. border. Saudi Arabia, Saudi Aramco just published the world's largest profit ever done in a quarter, $48 billion. Okay, because of the high oil price. They made $48 billion in the second quarter of 2022. Carry that over, that's $200 billion in a year. Absolutely insane amount of money. But watch this space. Saudi's already one of the largest military powers. You've got Iran-Saudi conflict fighting over the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's war chests now are absolutely stuffed with dollars. Turkey crashed. I mentioned a little bit in the currencies to 18-1. They cut interest rates again in the face of over 100% inflation. I mentioned I've got friends there. They're predicting civil war. Country can't go on like this. People are getting destroyed. Erdogan is a dictator. He's propped up pretty much by some very powerful families, many of them in the construction business. You saw them this last week over in Ukraine signing post-reconstruction deals for Turkish construction companies, kind of their own small regional belt and road, if you will. So that's what's going on in a few other hot spots. What now I'll talk about, and we'll wrap this broadcast up, is dragon wars and tiger fights in China. So the news came out this week. Guy named Xiao Jianhua is from Shanghai, was sentenced to 13 years in prison and fined $8 billion. That's how much money this guy is. This is just one data point in the war of Beijing against Shanghai. So what's happening, a lot of people don't realize, is that these companies in China are massive. I mean, there's been so much wealth created. China's 50% of everything now, 50% of copper imports, 50% of electrical production. I mean, they do 3 times the economic e-commerce parcels that the U.S. does. It produces the same amount of steel the U.S. does every 17 days. That's a U.S. annual number. U.S. does 10 cargo ships a year. China does 1,000. I mean, the numbers are just, every industry dwarfs the United States. Car production's 3 to 4 times, and they're 50% of the EV market now. China is the global juggernaut economy. Don't let anyone fool you about how great the American economy is because they charge $2,000 to get some stitches. All right, it's a fake economy. It's a paper-driven economy, and that's why you're looking now in U.S. productivity is collapsing. Real economic data points are collapsing because the money printing has to slow down or even halt to a large degree. But back to this guy, Xiao Jianhua, he controls money for a lot of very powerful Shanghai-based families. Now, a lot of times you'll see, what's going on with Alibaba? What's going on with property? Behind the scenes, this is the dragons and tigers fighting, okay? People don't know in China who actually owns these companies. There are people that are worth $200 billion, $300 billion that you've never heard of. Their money's all siphoned through families and kids and networks. And this guy was running a huge hoard of money for the Shanghai guys. Alibaba, a list of 100-some shareholders. Nobody knows who really owns it. Yes, Jack Ma's the face. He definitely doesn't have a majority share. Who really owns? Who's this secret list of families that own Alibaba? Okay, they're CCP Politburo members. Who owns Huawei? Is it Zheng Runfei? No, he's just the face. He owns less than 1%. Behind that is some shadowy labor union that owns Huawei, which is obviously a Chinese government-connected company. Okay, dominating the globe in 5G. Success story all its own, but it's got interesting ownership credentials with it. So who's getting attacked? You see Alibaba get taken down. You see the property sector. Several property companies get taken down. Who owns those companies? That's the Beijing group led by President Xi going after the Shanghai guys. The princelings in China have made a fortune. China's also a mixed market. You got a state-owned economy and you've got a private economy. A lot of small businesses that are the most competitive in the world. On the very high end, you've got the very, very large companies, the oil refiners, the telecom companies. These are all owned by the princelings. The princelings are the children and grandchildren of those original revolutionary leaders out of the CCP. Guys like Jiang Zemin. Okay, the guy, his family's worth, people think $500 billion. Okay, now his money's run by his grandson. His son's about 61. Grandson's in his 30s. He's running out of Singapore. All these guys have private equity firms and they're investing. They come to a guy like Jack Ma, let me in. I want in on the cap table. You get in on the cap table. Personal story aside, I had Jiang Zemin's son years ago contact me through a third party when I was in a Fortune 500 saying, we want to do a joint venture. This is Jiang Zemin's son. You better work with us. I said, okay, have him call me direct. He never called me. Nothing ever happened. But that's how business got done. Those guys have access to the bank loans, and they have access to the deals. And that's how Jiang Zemin's son was reportedly involved in every big project that came out of Shanghai for the last 30 years. So you've got this 30 years of excess, which I lived through in China, the 20 years there, of just the money grabs and the asset grabs and all of this, the Premier Xi is dealing with now. So he's dealing with these families. Has he got his own power base? Absolutely. But these are the guys that have been getting taken down. So when you see someone like a real estate company go down, it may not be the property sector. It's because their funding got cut by the Bank of China or whoever as directed by the CCP. So you've got dragons and tigers fighting there behind the scenes. Very interesting story. The palace power politics, very hard to read in China. Some of the best stuff that's come out recently in the last couple of years, a guy named Guo Wengui, Miles Guo. You can Google him. Kind of a real scumbag. I know friends out in Beijing that have dealt with him directly. Works with Steve Bannon now. He's funding his show. He was kind of dabbling in American politics. Long story short, he's an old Beijing guy, terrible real estate developer, but his best friend was the head of Ministry of State Security. That's like the head of CIA, FBI, and NSA all combined. So they had the dirt on everybody. He turned that into becoming a real estate developer. A friend of mine sold him stuff to his development company, never got paid. Years go by, he shorted all his suppliers, had the money to pay, but he didn't want to pay. And so he had a reputation around town. My friend had a meeting with them, said, hey, you may be a big fish on the CCP ladder, but I'm not as big as that, but I can still cause trouble. So he got paid, he said, with condition, I think it was a $2 million payment. I'll pay you this on the condition that you don't tell other people you got paid, because he didn't want to pay everyone else. And this guy is well known. He paid $1 million to get his mistress into a movie in China, to get her cast into a movie. He's not a nice guy. He's been blackballed to CCP. He's exiled. He's been living in the U.S. in a $70 million apartment. He's now had some judgments against him for the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. The guy's constantly on the run, but he's constantly, even as of this week, dishing dirt on the CCP. Now, his info may be a little old, but he probably has people that can get this stuff, and he just goes on these podcasts and dishes all this stuff. He's the one that came up with the number of Jiang Zemin's family of 500 billion. Is it true? It's easily 100 billion, I can tell you. Maybe 200 billion. Maybe 500. We just don't know. The palace power politics behind the scenes are going to make for some fascinating reading in 20 years when people come out with this, in books. But there's guys, Wang Jin, Pu Minghui, worth 200 billion. There's probably half of the world's people worth over 100 billion are in China, and you don't know their names. These are family power bases that now you're seeing the dragons and tigers fight. As China comes into more of an economic contraction. It's probably the worst it's been since well before I moved there. Probably it's worse it's been since the 90s, early 90s. So yeah, stay tuned for that space. That about covers the dragon wars and tiger fights. We covered Germany and the winter. We've got to watch that space. This winter is going to be ugly. Will social peace be challenged? You've seen it already happen in Holland. They may not hit the streets in winter, but this winter may be so bad that Europe may not be recognizable after this winter. So, and the U.S., while holding up generally against everyone else, is still in difficult times. We see recession coming. So that's where we are. I'm going to leave it here for episode 8. Follow me, Dan Collins 2011 on Twitter. Subscribe to the channel. Questions, comments, leave them on the YouTube channel. I try to answer everything that comes on there. And stay frosty, my friends. Take care. Bye-bye.